my family's from. I collect Soviet military. Got a safe full of Cold War and World War II and World War I era weapons, and I shoot them, I collect them. But trains, Soviet trains is a fascinating thing. A few years ago, I was doing some volunteer work at a senior center in Israel. It's all Russian speaking. You know, there's about 1 million, yeah, I think now there's about 1 million Russian speakers there. And I love talking to the veterans, men and women. And then I was talking to a guy, he was an officer on a train, on one of the armored trains. And honestly, it was one of the most bizarre, off-the-wall, unusual stories I'd ever heard from a veteran. You know, he talked about what it was like inside, how they used, the guns were actually tank turrets. So it's so fascinating to me. So I've, you know, for the last few years, I've been doing research on it, and I got a slideshow I'm going to show you. But it should be noted that, you know, Russia has, I mean, it's a big country, but they do have the world's largest rail system. And it's one of the oldest. It goes back to 1837. And it was started out as a big collection of narrow gauge trains all over the place. And some of those rails were actually made out of wood. And then, I mean, there were just so many of them, they decided, you know, by the 1850s, they started, they made it into an imperial thing where it started going, you know, across the country and with iron rails. And of course, as you know, by 1900, it was a massive rail system. Let me show you my presentation I put together. I want to talk less and show more. Marty, if you can make me co-host, please. And what was really neat, a few weeks ago in my art, you know, I have my art class I'm doing at my middle school. We did a whole week on armored trains and got some incredible artwork from the kids. Do I have, yes, I am. Thank you, Marty. Okay, so, no, that's not what I'm looking for. Sorry. Okay, I do have it up. Give me 1 second. This actually happens to me every day when I try to share stuff. There it is. Okay, and there we go. Okay, does that look good, everybody? The slideshow, everybody see it okay?
Yeah, that works.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so here, we're going from 1918 to, yes, the present. They're still using armored trains. I'm not sure today I would want to be in an armored train in a war, but they are still using them. Okay, it started out in the Revolution. This starts in the Russian Revolution. They were using them in World War II, but I'm kind of using 1917 as my starting point because, I mean, we could go all the way back to the 1850s. But Russia already had this massive rail system, and, you know, you were talking about massive distances. So they, you know, the Reds had them, the Whites had them, the Poles had them, the Czechs, the Germans, the Lithuanians. In fact, this is actually a Lithuanian train right here. And you can see, I mean, these look like naval guns, probably 6-inch or 3-inch. Okay, that's obviously a pose photo, but you know, that's one of the Bolshevik trains. Looks like they have a Maxim gun up here. And notice the little fort tower up here and the gun ports. And lots of rivets. That's an incredible picture with the snow. And look at these bizarre looking turrets. And then you notice they put the locomotive in the middle for supposed protection. Okay, that's at a museum near St. Petersburg. And when you're talking about that thing, I see, I don't know if they've repainted it or if that was the original color. Here's another one from Lithuania. Okay, that's Leon Trotsky. He was actually, the whole thing of having an army on rails was his idea. Okay, and then now we go into World War II. It should be noted that the Germans had armored trains too.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
What was the actual tactical or strategic use of these?
That's a good, I don't really think there was one. It was the typical Russian tactic of mass. Just put a bunch of them on the rails and start shooting, because they didn't do very well in World War II. But one thing, you know, about Russia is they, especially up until, you know, after World War II, it was a lot easier to carry things by rail. And one of the advantages the Russians had was, I mean, they could afford to get a lot of their rails bombed out because they had so many. Because, you know, the Germans may bomb 5 rail lines, but they still had 5 more.
So, but I still don't understand. So were these to bring just a few troops into key areas?
No. They were not really, no, they weren't troop transports.
No, I mean, okay. Were they to protect the people on board? Like bringing Lenin in from...
In the Russian Revolution, yeah, like Trotsky would ride an armored train, and the generals would always have their arm, as did the Tsarists and the White Russians too. But in World War II, it was more, they were trying to use them as shock weapons. But then, you know, by the middle of the war, I mean, they had so many tanks, and by 44, they were going so far into, you know, so far west that they really didn't matter. But there's not a lot written about their successes or failures.
Because like if the rail got broken on either side, it was sunk, you know, I mean.
Yeah. But number one thing to be clear about is their primary purpose was not troop transport.
Okay.
You know, the Soviets either trucked or walked. Now, the Germans did a lot of troop transport by a train, but they had a very, you know, until the middle of the war, I mean, they had a very deep interior line. They could afford to do that, you know, especially until, you know, the American and British air power made it a big problem. But, you know, up into late 42, they were able to do that, but that wasn't the primary objective with the Russians.
Bruce, the gauge, did they match? Could the Germans use the Russian rails?
Nope.
No, they were separate.
Okay.
Which is, you know, that's a good question.
Yeah, Russians were 5 foot, I think.
Okay, that's from the beginning of the war, and that's they were using actually tank turrets. That I think is from I believe that's from a KV-1 tank. I think a 75 millimeter. And they just ended up, I mean, they were basically tanks on railroad tracks.
That looks like a painting.
Yeah, that is, yeah. It's an illustration.
Okay.
Of course, this is all I mean, these are, you know, anti-aircraft. I mean, one thing I wonder looking at this is how the recoil affected the running of the train, or if they were actually able to fire it while moving. Okay, this, of course, is, you know, this is a painting, of course. And that's actually a T-34 turret. That's actually from the Revolution. That's actually Lenin. But it's great details. It looks like they had a little problem right here. That's sort of kind of shows you the limitations of this. Okay, I'm sure this is obviously idealized painting, but I don't know. I wouldn't want to be on that train with all those Stukas around. But you see, again, they have the locomotives in the middle, which honestly, I mean, to me, I mean, that just means it's just somewhere else to put the big target. Well, that's of course a stamp. This is from a model. Okay, this is what I'm talking about, Ron. This is Engage. This is a guy. This is scratch built and I think kit bashed. Notice the Lend-Lease, the M3 lead tanks, and the M3 Stewarts.
Bruce,
Yes.
would they use more than one locomotive?
From every picture I've seen, they only use the one in the middle, or, you know, here's one in front, and that looks like an American one.
I don't think so, because I don't know that we had armored cars.
But you know what?
The only military type armored car was Abraham Lincoln's funeral car that I know of.
A lot of the locomotives were Lend-Lease locomotives too, because we sent a lot of rolling stock and locomotives to the Soviets.
Yeah, but that was all World War II stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, now these are things that get really interesting. The Cold War. Okay, this is outside. This is a museum outside of St. Petersburg. That's a forget what it's called. I think a BR-24. You know, that's a ballistic missile. Like, well, I remember our MX missile program. That's what this was. And you can see it looks like it pops out of the train cars and then launches. And it looks like these are actually disguised as passenger trains. Then notice the date, 1975. It was this, you know, maneuvers. That's a train. And those are a T-62 turrets they have on the train. Again, you know, in the age of attack helicopters and guided missiles and you know, ground attack jets, you know, I'm not sure about the wisdom of this, but you know, looks good. It looks good for propaganda and be fun for modeling. Yeah, and of course, this Cold War period. You see the T-62 down there. Now, believe it or not, they still have armored trains. This one, when I got this photo, the caption was this was in Chechnya in 1992. See, that's the Russian Federation flag. So this is, you know, this is post-Soviet period. Very, very interesting. I mean, you think about it now, I mean, you know, you could, this would be a sitting duck for a drone. Again, this was from Chechnya in the mid-90s. You know, it doesn't look very well maintained. Okay, I'm going to leave this up to you on your own time, but I got some really good videos here. This is a news story about the nuclear weapons trains that Russia's actually, they're trying to revive them. There's some good videos here. They're Russian videos. It's like the Russian History Channel. And again, you know, you can watch these on your own. I don't want to, YouTube's don't seem to come out very well on, and I don't want to take up the time showing videos, but one of them is a reenactor. It's a restored train. This is in Russia, and he gives a tour of what it's like inside. And that one is really amazing.
What do you mean inside? Their living facilities?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the museum, you can go in there and, there's, the guy, he's, it's like I do the reenacting, they're dressed up
Oh,
and,
okay, yeah,
living history.
yes.
Very, very, very cramped, as you can imagine. And of course, this is another Russian-built train that's still in use. Our friend across the ocean uses an armored train built in Russia. So with this, I bid you farewell with this last slide.
Hey, Bruce, I have a question.
Yeah.
What about the armored train from James Bond? What about that one?
Which one? Weren't there a few? Which
It's the
one?
one where he uses the tank and he shoots at the armored train and then it blows up. Have you seen that one? I forget which movie it's from.
GoldenEye.
Yeah, GoldenEye.
GoldenEye. Oh, I remember that. Yeah, where they go to. I think they're or it's supposed to be Central Asia. Yeah, I don't even remember that, to be honest. But that movie was made during the Chechen War. So, and there were quite a few. I don't know where they filmed it, but there were. I mean, they were sending them down there.
And the Germans had the rail guns.
Oh well, yeah. Well, they had the Bertha and the Thor, and oh yeah. Well, those were, and that was a little different because those were meant to be, long range. They were just so heavy that's how they could transport. Those were a little more ingenious because they didn't take those into battle.
If
And
you
of course,
think
they had
about
it in World War I too. They had the one gun that they were bombing Paris with, that had a 75-mile range.
yeah, if you
LA,
think about a armored train, it's really there's a lot of stuff on the TV right now about like all these abandoned, World War II and Cold War facilities, and one of the things that so many of those places have in common is they were built before World War II. But by the time World War II came around, technology changed so fast. So many of those defensive forts and all those, gun batteries and stuff were already out of date. The technology was just able to destroy most of it. It seems
Well-
like the armored train was kind of like a neat idea, and it sounds really cool. It looks great, but boy, you're a sitting target and you can disable it.
Yeah, well,
by-
I have a whole file. I mean, it's a whole other presentation on the armored trains and the fighting trains of the Chinese Civil War from 1921. Now, those were pretty damned effective because they were usually going up against cavalry or infantry.
well,
And they would just plow right through and just, and of course, there were so many different, whether it was the warlords or the army or the Reds, those were a little more effective. And then the Japanese used a lot of them in Manchuria in the 30s. Because you're just talking about you're talking about massive distances with the steppes and the plains.
well, LA
Plains
grew up in
meaning